Found my daughter at a rest area off I-64 in Virginia, sitting on a concrete bench outside the women's restroom with her coat pulled tight around her and her left hand pressed flat against the side of her face. It was March 7, 2024. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees after dark. She'd been out there for nearly 2 hours. When I walked through that parking lot and the headlights hit her, she looked up. She didn't call out. She didn't move toward me. She just sat there with that look on her face that I hadn't seen since she was 9 years old and her mother left. Not crying. Something worse than crying. The look of someone who has finally understood something they didn't want to understand. I sat down on that bench next to her and put my arm around her. She was shaking. My name is Owen Decker. I'm 58 years old. I spent 26 years as a licensed insurance fraud investigator, first with a regional firm out of Charlottesville, then on my own. I've spent more of my working life reading contracts than most attorneys. I retired 3 years ago. My wife Joanna passed 11 years back from ovarian cancer, and it's been me and my daughter Mara ever since. She was 19 when her mother died. She handled it the way she handles most things, which is quietly and without asking for help until she absolutely has to. Mara is 31 now. She teaches second grade at an elementary school in Richmond. She is one of those people who genuinely likes children, who brings home stacks of their drawings and puts them on her refrigerator and talks about her students by name. She saves her money carefully. She drives a 6-year-old Honda and packs her lunch and has a retirement account she started at 24. She is not reckless. She is not naive. She is simply someone who chose to trust the people she loved, and that trust was used against her in a way that was deliberate and planned and put her alone on a highway at night in near-freezing temperatures. The people who left her there knew all of that. They had known her for 18 months. I need to go back to the beginning. Mara had been engaged to a man named Kyle Sutton for about 5 months when this happened. I'd met his family a few times. His father was Harlan Sutton, who owned a chain of auto dealerships across central Virginia. 3 lots in the Richmond area, 1 outside Fredericksburg. His mother was Viv. His older brother Derek worked as general manager at the Fredericksburg location. They had a large house in Goochland County, the kind with a long private driveway and a horse pasture they didn't actually use. Harlan drove a different truck every few months and had the easy confidence of a man who had never in his life been told he was wrong about something important. The first time I met Harlan Sutton, I shook his hand and felt the particular quality of a man who is already calculating you before you finished introducing yourself. Not warmth, not interest. The fixed attention of someone deciding what category to put you in. I didn't say anything to Mara about it. She was happy. Kyle made her laugh in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I kept my mouth shut and watched. The first real warning came 4 months after the engagement. Harlan called Mara into a private meeting, not Kyle, just Mara, and presented her with a joint real estate investment agreement. He explained it as a family tradition that the Suttons liked to welcome new members by including them in family business ventures. He called it a trust-building exercise. The agreement proposed that Mara and Kyle each contribute $40,000 into a jointly managed LLC that would purchase and flip a residential property in Henrico County. Harlan would serve as managing member of the LLC with sole decision-making authority on all financial transactions above $5,000. Mara told me about it that same evening. She said it felt a little strange, but that Kyle had encouraged her to do it, and that it seemed like a good investment opportunity. I asked her to send me the documents before she signed anything. I called my former colleague Vance Whitfield the next morning. Vance spent 20 years as a contract attorney before he went into private consulting. He's 61, methodical in the way that people who've read 10,000 bad contracts become methodical. He called me back 4 hours later. "Owen," he said, "Section 3, subsection C." I told him to walk me through it. As managing member, Harlan retains authority to dissolve the LLC at his discretion and distribute remaining assets according to his determination of each member's contribution value. That determination is his alone to make. Mara puts in $40,000. If Harlan decides her contribution value is $15,000, she gets $15,000 when the LLC dissolves. The rest goes into the general assets of the LLC, which he controls. I asked him what that meant in plain terms. It means she can put in $40,000 and walk away with whatever number Harlan decides to give her, and she has no legal recourse because she signed the agreement giving him that authority. Mara refused to sign. She told Kyle, and Kyle told his father. Harlan called her and said Vance had misread the clause. He said it was standard LLC language. He said he was disappointed that she didn't trust the family. Kyle got quieter after that. Not cold exactly, but something shifted in the way he spoke about his father. Like he was recalibrating how much of himself he was willing to show her. 6 weeks later, Harlan proposed the weekend trip. He called it a reconciliation weekend, a chance for Mara to get to know the family better on neutral ground. He'd rented a cabin property outside Waynesboro up in the Shenandoah Valley. Good food, a fireplace, mountain views. He said he wanted to clear the air about the LLC disagreement. He said Viv had specifically asked for Mara to be there, that she was fond of her, and wanted the families to get along before the wedding. Mara called me the night before they left. "Dad, I don't really want to go," she said. I told her to listen to that. She said Kyle had been making an effort lately. She said she didn't want to be the reason things stayed tense before the wedding. She said maybe a weekend together was exactly what they needed. I told her to call me when she got to the cabin. She never made it there. The call I got that evening wasn't from Mara. It was from Kyle. 8:53 p.m. He said they'd stopped at a rest area on I-64 and that Mara had gotten out to use the restroom and that they'd pulled ahead a bit, just to the next exit, just to wait for her. He said she had her phone. He said she was fine. He said his dad thought it would be good for her to take a few minutes alone to think about whether she was really committed to the family. I asked him one question. Where exactly is she right now? He named the rest stop, exit 96 westbound. I hung up. I called Mara. No answer. Called again. No answer. Fourth call she picked up, barely. "Dad, Mara, where are you?" "At the rest stop. I've been waiting. I thought they were coming back." A pause. "It's really cold. My battery is almost dead." "Are you inside or outside?" "Outside. The building's locked after dark." "Dad, I don't have my suitcase. Everything is in the trunk of their car. Get to the light. Stay where people can see you. I'm leaving right now." I called Vance from the driveway. He'd already driven this road. I told him everything in under 3 minutes. He said, "Get her. I'll start pulling records tonight." It took me 2 hours and 11 minutes to reach that rest stop. She was on that concrete bench when I got there. I've driven those roads my whole life. I don't remember a single mile of that drive. I got her into the truck and turned the heat up and drove her to an urgent care clinic in Staunton. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Patricia Ames, examined her and told me she was showing early signs of mild hypothermia and significant distress. Her core temperature had dropped. She was dehydrated. Dr. Ames asked me privately how long she'd been outside in those temperatures. "Close to 2 hours," I said. Dr. Ames looked at me steadily. "Another hour and we'd be talking about something more serious. I want you to understand that." I understood it. Harlan Sutton called me at 11:40 that night while I was in the waiting room. He had the tone of a man delivering a reasonable explanation to an unreasonable person. "Owen, we feel just terrible about how this unfolded. Kyle got turned around on the exits. We drove back as soon as we realized." "You called me at 9 p.m. and told me you'd pulled ahead intentionally," I said. "That's not getting turned around." A pause. "I think there's been some miscommunication about the evening. We'd really like to." "Harlan," I said, "don't call this number again." I hung up. Vance arrived at the clinic at 7 the next morning carrying coffee and a manila folder. He sat across from me in the waiting area and opened it on the chair between us. He had been working through the night. "The Sutton dealerships have been carrying a refinancing balloon on their Fredericksburg lot," he said. "I found it through the state DMV dealer licensing records and the Spotsylvania County property filings. The refinancing deadline comes due in approximately 11 months. The amount is significant." He put a printed page on the chair between us. $260,000. I looked at the number. "They needed liquid funds that couldn't be traced back to the dealership accounts," Vance said. "The LLC agreement with Mara was structured to give Harlan access to her contribution without standard partnership protections. If she'd signed, her $40,000 would have been accessible to him within 30 days. More importantly," he turned the page, "Kyle has a joint account with Mara. They opened it 8 months ago to start saving for the wedding and house. The balance is currently around $94,000. I sat back in my chair. The LLC wasn't the main event. The LLC was the test, to see if she'd sign something without reading it carefully. When she didn't, they had a problem. They needed her rattled enough to be more cooperative, or they needed her out of the picture entirely before she figured out what they were really after. He pulled out his phone and set it on the chair next to the folder. On the screen was a series of text messages. He explained that a contact of his at a civil litigation firm had already filed a preliminary preservation request for the Sutton family communications through a legal process initiated the previous night. The thread was from a group text. The name at the top read, Usseton Fam. The participants were Harlan, Viv, Derek, Kyle, and a name I recognized but hadn't placed immediately, Annette Grosso. Vance told me Annette was Harlan's sister and a co-signer on the original dealership loan from 7 years ago. She had financial exposure in the refinancing. I read through the messages. Harlan? She's not going to sign the LLC without more pressure. We're running out of time on the Fredericksburg situation. VIV. Kyle needs to manage her better. She's suspicious. Derek. Same play we used on the Moorfield guy. Shake her up. See if she comes back in line or walks. Either way, we're in a better position. Harlan. Cabin weekend next month. Kyle. Make sure she doesn't know what it's actually about. Kai Warel. She'll come. I'll handle it. Annette Grasso. Harlan, be careful. If this one talks, we can't contain it the way we did last time. Harlan, she won't. She's a school teacher. She doesn't know anyone who matters. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down. Who is the Moorfield guy? I asked. Vance already had the answer. He'd spent part of the night on that too. A man named Stuart Fenn had been a business partner of Derek Sutton's on a commercial HVAC installation contract in Culpeper County 2 years earlier. Midway through the contract, Harlan had introduced a revised profit-sharing agreement that would have shifted 20% of Stewart's earnings on the contract to the Sutton business entity. Stewart had refused to sign it. 3 weeks later, the Suttons had invited him on a hunting weekend to a property in Page County. They'd left him there overnight, 12 miles from his truck, in November weather. He'd walked out by morning. He'd never spoken about it publicly because Derek had made it clear that any complaint would result in a contract dispute that would tie up the money Stewart was owed for months. Stuart Fenn had stayed quiet for 2 years. Vance had found him with 4 phone calls. He'll give a statement, Vance told me. He said he's wanted to ever since it happened. He just needed someone to go first. I looked at the ceiling of that waiting room for a long moment. I had spent 26 years investigating fraud. I had read thousands of fraudulent documents, sat across from hundreds of people who had constructed careful deceptions and believed they were smart enough to make them hold. I knew exactly the kind of calculation that had been made about my daughter. She's a school teacher. She doesn't know anyone who matters. They didn't know what I did for a living. They hadn't asked. They didn't know about Vance. They hadn't thought to look. When Mara was discharged that afternoon, I brought her to my house in Charlottesville. I set her up in her old room and told her to sleep for as long as she needed. She slept through most of the first day and into the next morning. On the second day, she came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and looked out the window at the yard where she used to play as a kid. Was Kyle in that group text? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Dad, just tell me. Yes. She nodded. Yes, she nodded. She kept looking at the window. She was quiet for a long time. Then, he told me to come on that trip. He said it would help. He said his dad was trying to reach out. She put the mug down. He knew the whole time. The messages were sent 3 weeks before the trip. He had them on his phone. She didn't say anything after that for a while. Then she asked to read everything. I showed her the full thread. The LLC documents with Vance's notes, the Fredericksburg refinancing records, the information about Stuart Fenn. She read it all the way through without stopping. When she finished, she set the phone face down on the table. Okay, she said. What do we do? That was the only conversation we needed to have. Vance moved steadily over the next 3 weeks while Mara stayed at my house and got her footing back. He recorded Stuart Fenn's formal statement on a Wednesday afternoon at my kitchen table. He filed a complaint with the Virginia State Police Financial Crimes Unit regarding the LLC agreement and the misrepresentation of its terms. He contacted the Virginia State Corporation Commission about irregularities in the Sutton dealership's financial filings. He also reached out to a business reporter named Owen Chen at a Richmond publication, different Owen, no relation, who had been looking into a separate complaint involving one of the Sutton dealerships and a customer financing scheme. Vance didn't hand him the whole story. He just made sure he knew to look at the Fredericksburg refinancing timeline and the LLC structure. 2.5 weeks after the trip, Harlan's attorney called. His name was Mitchell Reese, and he had the practiced smoothness of someone whose job is to make problems quiet down before they become permanent. He offered Mara $85,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. I told him Mara would see them in court. There was a pause. Then, Mr. Mara Decker, the Sutton family has considerable standing in this region and every interest in resolving this without further exposure. So does my daughter, I said, and her interest is in a courtroom. Tell Harlan that. I hung up. The criminal complaint was filed the following week. Reckless endangerment and criminal intimidation, based on the circumstances of leaving Mara at the rest stop and the documented coercion of Stuart Fenn. The civil fraud complaint went in 4 days later centered on the misrepresentation of the LLC agreement's terms and the documented intent to access Mara's funds without her understanding of the agreement she would have been signing. The business reporter's story on the customer financing scheme ran 10 days after that. In the 4th paragraph, there was a single line noting that the dealership owner was currently the subject of a civil fraud proceeding and a related criminal complaint. He had found that through public court filings. We had simply made sure the timing was right. The Sutton name, which had meant something in certain Richmond business circles, began meaning something different rather quickly. Former customers came forward about the financing scheme. A previous employee contacted the SEC investigator with payroll documentation showing off-the-books payments that had been routed to reduce the appearance of the dealership's operating income. By May, Harlan had lost his preferred financing relationship with 2 major auto manufacturers. The Fredericksburg lot was under review for its dealer license. The Goochland house was listed quietly in June. The criminal hearing was held in September. The presiding judge was a woman named the Honorable Margaret Osei. She had been on the bench in Richmond for 16 years. She was the kind of judge who doesn't perform authority because she doesn't need to. The courtroom was quiet when she was in it, the way rooms go quiet around people who simply know what they're doing. She let the prosecutor walk through the documented record without interruption, the preserved text messages, the LLC agreement with Vance's annotated analysis of Section 3, subsection C, Stuart Fenn's testimony, which he gave calmly and with complete specificity, the medical documentation from Dr. Ames about Mara's condition on admission, the weather data showing temperatures at exit 96 on the night of March 7th, the call log showing Kyle's call to me at 8:53 p.m. and the precise language he had used. Harlan testified on the second day. He wore a dark jacket and the expression of a man accustomed to being given the benefit of the doubt. He said the rest stop situation had been a miscommunication that escalated. He said the LLC agreement had been mischaracterized by an outside attorney with no understanding of the Sutton family's business practices. He said Stuart Fenn's account was exaggerated and colored by a long-standing contract dispute. The prosecutor asked him to explain, in plain language, what authority Section 3, subsection C of the LLC agreement would have given him over Mara's contributed funds if she had signed it. Harlan said it was standard managing member language. She asked him again, specifically, what does it allow you to do with her $40,000? He looked at his attorney. His attorney didn't help him. He said he believed the language had been drafted more broadly than he had intended. She let that answer sit in the room for a moment. Then she moved on. Kyle did not testify. His attorney cited Fifth Amendment protections. That decision was noted. Derek testified briefly and offered very little. Annette Grasso testified that she had expressed concerns about the plan and had not been present at the rest stop. The messages from her phone made the second of those claims difficult to evaluate clearly. Judge Osei delivered her ruling the following morning. I want to be specific about what happened here, she said. A woman was left alone at a highway rest stop in below freezing temperatures at night, without her belongings, without reliable phone access, 2 hours from home. This was not an accident. It was not a miscommunication. The documentary record shows it was discussed, agreed upon, and coordinated in advance by multiple members of this family. The same family had done something functionally identical to another person 2 years earlier and faced no consequence for it. That prior incident was not a cautionary lesson. It was confirmation that this approach worked. She looked at Harlan directly. "You assessed my daughter. I am speaking of the victim, not my own family. You assessed this woman and concluded that she was someone without resources or connections that could threaten you. You were wrong about that. The people she had around her were not visible to you because you didn't think to look. That oversight is not a mitigating factor. It is simply what happened." Harlan received 14 months, suspended after 5 with 2 years of supervised probation and a permanent no-contact order covering Mara, Vance, and myself. Viv received 8 months, suspended after 3. Derek received 6 months, suspended fully with 2 years probation and mandatory financial oversight reporting. Annette Grasso received probation and a substantial civil penalty for her role in the financial structure. Kyle was not charged criminally. The civil case was filed separately 2 months later. The civil proceeding resulted in a judgment against the Sutton family entity of $340,000. The SEC's audit of the dealership financials, completed the following winter, found the Fredericksburg balloon payment discrepancy, confirmed the off-the-books payroll routing, and identified additional compliance failures going back 3 years. Harlan's dealer license was suspended pending appeal. The Fredericksburg lot closed by February. The Goochland house sold in January. The long private driveway and the unused horse pasture. The truck Harlan drove every few months. All of it. Kyle sent Mara one message 3 weeks after the hearing. She showed it to me. She didn't ask me what to do. She blocked the number and put her phone back in her pocket and went back to grading papers at my kitchen table. That was her decision. I didn't say a word about it either way. She went back to her classroom in November. Her students had made her cards while she was away, which her aide had collected and saved. She told me about them on the phone that evening, described a few of them, laughed about one from a kid named Tommy who had drawn her as a superhero with what appeared to be a cape made of math worksheets. She called me every Sunday after that, same as she always had. But the calls felt different, more present, somehow. The way things feel when you've been reminded that you can't take them for granted. Vance came over for dinner most Sundays now. The 3 of us sat around the same table where he'd taken Stuart Fenn's statement, and Mara cooked whatever she'd decided to try that week. And we talked about her students and the cases Vance still consulted on occasionally, and whatever was happening in the world that was worth paying attention to. It was good. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. I think about that parking lot sometimes. March 7th. The drive up 64 with my hands on the wheel, not knowing what I was going to find when I got there. The headlights swinging across the rest stop and landing on Mara on that bench. The look on her face. I spent 26 years in fraud investigation. The core of that work is learning to see what people hide and understanding why they chose to hide it. The clients who hired me always wanted to know whether the fraud was sophisticated, whether the person who did it was clever. In my experience, the answer was almost never yes. Most fraud is simple. Most of it works because the person on the other side is trusting, or distracted, or in love, or simply hasn't been taught to look at page 3, subsection C of a document they were told was standard. Harlan Sutton looked at my daughter and saw a school teacher who packed her lunch and drove a 6-year-old Honda and wouldn't know the difference between a standard managing member clause and a clause written to strip her of her money. He was right that she didn't know the difference. Most people don't. That's not a character flaw. That's just not having spent 26 years reading the contracts that other people were hoping you wouldn't read carefully. He was wrong about everything else. He didn't know about Vance. He didn't think to ask who her father was or what he'd done for a living. He made the most common mistake I ever saw in 26 years. He decided he already understood the situation before he'd gathered enough information to make that call. I used to tell clients that the most dangerous document is not the one that looks suspicious. It's the one that's designed to look routine, the one sitting in the middle of a stack of papers at a family dinner, next to a bottle of wine and a warm smile and a man in an expensive watch telling you this is just how the family does things. If you're watching this and someone is presenting you with an agreement and telling you it's standard, trust the part of you that wants to read it more carefully. Trust the part of you that wants a second opinion. You are not being difficult. You are not being paranoid. You are doing the one thing that the person who drafted that document is counting on you not to do. Read the whole thing. The bond between Mara and me was not something Harlan Sutton could see from the outside. He saw a young woman without a mother, without a wealthy family behind her, without obvious connections. He did not see the years of Sunday phone calls. He did not see what it means to raise a daughter alone and watch her become someone with that kind of steadiness and that kind of trust. He did not understand that when you come for someone like that, you are not just dealing with her. He found out what he was dealing with. So did the rest of them. I've thought a lot about why it went the way it did. Not the legal outcomes. Those followed their own logic, one document at a time. I mean, why the whole thing was possible in the first place. Why Harlan Sutton looked at my daughter and saw an easy target, and why he was wrong. The answer isn't complicated, but it took me a while to sit with it honestly. Harlan made his assessment based on what he could see. A schoolteacher, a modest car, a young woman without a wealthy family behind her. He gathered that much information and then he stopped gathering because he thought he already understood the situation. That's the part that gets people in trouble, in fraud, and in life. Not malice exactly. Overconfidence. The assumption that you've seen enough. What he couldn't see was what Mara had been building quietly for 12 years. The retirement account she started at 24. The discipline of someone who lost her mother young and decided without making a production of it that she was going to be the kind of person who reads the fine print and saves her money and doesn't sign things she doesn't understand. She came to me with that LLC agreement the same evening Harlan handed it to her. Not because she panicked. Because she'd been careful her whole adult life and she wasn't about to stop. That's not something you can see from across a dinner table. Vance would say that the contract always tells you who you're dealing with if you're willing to read it carefully enough. Section 3, subsection C told me everything I needed to know about Harlan Sutton before I ever sat across from him in a courtroom. A man who writes that clause into a family investment agreement isn't making a business decision. He's making a statement about what he thinks of the person signing it. He thought Mara wouldn't notice. He thought that even if she did, she wouldn't have anyone who could explain what it meant. He was wrong twice. I think about what it takes to do what Mara did in the months after March 7th. She went back to her classroom. She graded papers at my kitchen table the week after Harlan's hearing. She called me every Sunday and talked about Tommy's superhero drawing and what she was planning to cook that weekend. She didn't collapse into the story of what had been done to her. Didn't let it become the thing that defined her. That requires something that I don't think gets talked about enough. The decision, made quietly and without ceremony, to keep being who you are after someone has tried to make you into a casualty. That's not resilience as a concept. That's resilience as a daily practice. It looks like making lunch and showing up and not letting what happened on I-64 in March become the most important thing about you. What happened to Harlan Sutton was the direct result of the choices he made. Not fate, not luck running out. He chose to build a financial scheme on the assumption that the people around him were less capable than they appeared. He chose to use his son to keep Mara in the dark. He chose to leave a woman alone on a highway at night and call it a mix-up. Each of those choices produced a consequence. The consequences stacked. By the time the SEC finished its audit and the dealer license was suspended, it wasn't bad luck. It was the accumulated weight of every decision he'd made, landing exactly where it was always going to land. I spent 26 years watching that happen. The people who think they're smart enough to stay ahead of the consequences never are, not because they're not intelligent. Because intelligence without integrity has a ceiling, and that ceiling tends to arrive at the worst possible moment. Owen Decker, Mara's father, former fraud investigator. That's who Harlan forgot to look up.